Are comic book collectors still buying slabs? Let's take a look at some aspects of the comic book market up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Before we get started, please like, comment, subscribe. Check out the description of this video for links, Instagram, whatnot, eBay store, email, all that great stuff. I appreciate everyone for stopping by. I didn't get a chance to hunt today. So I've been thinking about this for a while because I think there's been a perception in the comic book community that people are moving away from slabs and buying raw books. And there may be some truth to this. But let's take a look at the numbers in some cases. Now, this is not a big overall picture, but I picked out a handful of books to look at sales starting in 2019 in certain grades. And we're going to look at silver, bronze, copper, modern. But one thing to keep in mind, right? When we look at the graphs and, we see the sales, everything that we're looking at is based on graded books, not raws. And maybe there is still a pretty decent market. I think there is truth to the idea that the differential between the value of a raw book and a graded book has decreased. I had done a video a few weeks ago about the collection I passed on where somebody had graded a whole bunch of books that never should have been graded. And during the comic boom where people were jumping in inexperienced, and to a degree, I include myself in that, that I wasn't familiar with grading. I'd been collecting comics for 50 years at that time, and I knew comics, I knew keys, I knew less then than I do now. But there was this perception, and there was some truth behind it, that any comic would be worth more graded than raw. And in certain cases, that held true. I think that has decreased some in some areas. Now, I think it's decreased for high-value mid-grade books, which are generally gold, silver, bronze. If a book is worth $200 slabbed in a 6.0, how much less is it worth raw? And that's a good question to ask. And that's something, it certainly should be for a Silver Age book. There should be probably a $35 to $40 differential minimum just for grading fees. I think for high grade books, once you start to get higher value books into the 9 rarer books, let's say the top 25%, maybe the top 10% of grades of a certain book, I think they do still command a value graded. And I do know that for almost every book, a 9.8 is worth more graded than raw, because there's no certainty that a raw book is going to get a 9.8. Newer books, maybe not so much, but you talk about at 10 years old or more, that, you can get on the shelves. It's probably going to be a good chance you can find a 9.8. But you start going back to the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, and it's hard to get 9.8s before 1979 because comics just weren't cared for the same way. But even a book that came out 10 years ago, there's going to be a premium for a 9.8 graded. That's for sure. But I was interested in, and this is what we're going to talk about in this video, I was interested in what about key comic books and sales of graded comic books. Now, I did two things. I tried to steer clear of books that had surges due to movie television news. Savage She-Hulk #1 Moon Knight #1, Amazing Spider-Man 361. Those are books that had ups and downs. I was looking for keys that have been keys and have been desirable books all along. Now, there is a little bit of a play there. So first, let's look at the numbers that I put together. And I started looking at using GP analysis, started looking in 2018. Now, the first book I looked at, the granddaddy of them all, Amazing Fantasy 15, and I looked at the most commonly moved grades, a 2.0 to a 5.0. So here by year, 2018 to 2024, each year in each grade, the number of sales of a Universal Blue Label. Now, then the total of all those grades for each year. Now, what I did for 2024, I tripled that amount because we've gone through about a third of the year, maybe a little bit more, but about a third of the year. And I think we can see here, we went from 53 to 57, 60, 52, 64, 53. And we're actually on track this year. There have been 24 sold to date. We're on track to outdo all of those previous years. So for low grade, affordable copies of Amazing Fantasy 15, the number of graded copies sold has been pretty consistent. I mean, including the boom, right? A variation of just 11 copies, right? Or about 20% more than the minimum, right? A low of 53, a high of 64. The high is or a low of 52 and a high of 64. The high in 2022, peak of the boom. A little bit of spec there with another Spider-Man film. Actually, the Spider-Man film most recently came out in 2020. So, yeah. But still, boom, pricing. And this isn't prices. This is the number of books sold. Now, another caveat here is that in 2020 and into 2021, most books were sold online, right? There were fewer in-person sales. Now, these just include the sales that are captured by GP analysis. It doesn't include, obviously, in-person sales at shows. It doesn't include Instagram live sales, that kind of thing, or YouTube claim sales, whatever it is. But it is a picture of the market. So for key Silver Age book, very little change. Let's go to another key Silver Age book that hasn't had, this character has had their arc, but still has remained really popular. And it is Tales of Suspense 39, the first appearance of Iron Man. And again, here, a lot of consistency, right? From 2018, then we're talking about, again, the same grade range as AF15, 2.0 to 5.0. 40s and 50s, a little bit of a dip in 2023, a little bit of a dip last year. But there have already been 23 sales so far this year. I triple that on a pace for 69. The number of graded sales of Tales of Suspense is set to outpace the last 6 years. So people are buying graded books of Tales of Suspense 69. It doesn't appear that there's really much differential in terms of the grades. So far this year, only 1.20, only 1.50. And again, I just think overall the book is now the prices are coming down. Does this mean that people are buying the books now in anticipation of this is the lowest it's going to be? We don't know. We don't know, what economic conditions are going to hold. But again, it looks for both of these key Silver Age books, and they're expensive key Silver Age books, tens of thousands of dollars for the AF15 and thousands of dollars for a low grade Tales of Suspense 39. The sales for graded books are pretty robust so far in 2024. This is, again, 2024 is a predicted value. Now, let's go to the Bronze Age and the biggest book of the Bronze Age. And there is a little bit of movie news behind this, but I think this is a book that's always sold. It's Incredible Hulk 181. And again, we're pretty consistent. There were a lot of sales in 2019 that outpaced all of the other years, but every other year, the number of sales is in the 300 range, 322 to 396. And we're looking to be right smack dab in the middle there. Now, the grade distribution I'm looking at is a 502 and 90. And it's a pretty healthy amount of information, right? We're talking about hundreds of sales every year, and it's been pretty consistent. So you would expect maybe a little bit more this year, just because of the Deadpool Wolverine news and the excitement around Wolverine and X-Men in general. But it's holding consistent. So far we've seen, as we've gone through time, not a lot of dip in these books. Let's go to another one that has a lot of sales, another Bronze Age book, and that's Star Wars 1. Now, this is interesting. 2018, 2019, 2020, and then it ramps up a little bit. Starting with, actually, this is off a little bit. This should be, I don't know why that is that way. Give me a second. I have to fix, I messed up a cell. Equals D13. There we go. That's better. So a little bit of a jump, but again, really consistent. And look, we're on a pace, right? There have already been 323 sales this year. If you triple that, about 969. There were more sales in 2023 than any of the previous years, the previous 5 years. And it's projected that there could be more sales in 2024 of grades from 7.0 to 9.8. Okay. So people are buying slabs of these. We've gone through the Silver and the Bronze Age. 4 key books. It's not entirely descriptive. Now, a lot of other books, the demand for them is driven by speculation, movie news, all that sort of thing. And that's why I wanted to stay away from these. These are solid keys. Star Wars #1 is always going to be a key. It always has been a key. And we can see across multiple grades, the sales are fairly consistent. Right? Now, I would posit, as we move along, lower value grades, right? Grades that are under $200, we may see less sales as time goes on, because there's going to be less of a differential between raw and graded. However, supply and demand means that people have like a 7.0 Star Wars 1, which goes for how much? Let's see. Star Wars 1 is not one of the books I had loaded up. Star Wars #1 and a 7.0. A pretty attainable book, I would say. $7.0, about $200, right? So, and again, the sales are down, but the values are down, but it doesn't seem as though the demand is down for this book. It's still selling. Let's move into the Copper Age. Right? And Amazing Spider-Man 252, first appearance of the black suit. Now, this is interesting, though. Look at the sales of this book during the boom, leading up into during the boom. Now, how much is this connected to Venom? Let There Be Carnage. We're looking at 700, 800, 900 sales. Right? I have to do this one again. Yeah. And then it, boom, drops in half, and it stayed that way. So the tail off in graded sales, and this is across a number of grades, tailed off prior to the boom. Right? I'm gonna leave your comments below. What do you think? How much of this demand for this book in 2019 and 2020 is related to the second Venom movie? Because 2021 and 2022 were when the boom occurred, and the book had been consistent since then, and is kind of on track for about the same number of sales, 400 and change sales. So it seems a lot of sales here in 2019, 2020. Now let's go to another Venom related book. I think this is the most graded book there is. and it's more valuable than 252, and that's 300, the first appearance of Venom. And here we see a lot of sales in 2018. That's our biggest number, right? I have to correct this again. It's the same number essentially. Then it kind of, we've had a little bit of a tail off, but not much. This year, about the same. I don't think we're seeing, I mean, let's take a look at the higher grades. Yeah, there's a tail off in the higher grades too. I thought it might just be the lower grades where people say, it's a 9, an 8.0. I'll just sell it raw. It's not worth getting, a graded copy, but it looks like there's been a little bit of a fall off. And again, when did Carnage come out? The Venom Let There Be Carnage movie came out in 2019, correct? No, 2022 or late 2021. So there has been a little bit of a tail off after that, right? A couple of consistent years, a little bit less, and it looks like a bounce back this year. I don't think that the tail off is that significant. We're kind of in that same range. People are still buying graded books of this. Let's go to a lesser value book. And I'm only going to look at 9/8 for these more modern books because this book is not really worth much in less than that. And this is Spider-Man #1, cover A. But look at this, right? 179, 178. And then it jumps up to 328, 355, 609 in 2022, 447, 501. So we have a maximum in 2022. That makes sense. Comic boom, values were high. Everybody was jumping in, grading stuff. It hasn't fallen off that much. We're on track for 500 sales of this book in a 9.8 this year, which is higher than any of the year. We're already at 167. We're already 167 sales of this book in a 9.8. That's almost as many sales as we had in the entire year of 2018 and 2019. Now, I want to look into this a little deeper, right? Because this is, here it is. This, I think, is what I'm looking for. Yeah, Spider-Man 1. I was interested in, so we're talking about 167 books. Out of those 167, and again, we're talking about under $100, down to 41. How many of these are recent slabs? Right, that people are getting them slabbed to flip them, right? I would say anything with a number of 4.3 or greater, 1, 2, 3, 44,044 is, when was this graded? 329. So I would say, yeah. So what was graded recently? 1, 2, 3, the 419 maybe. That'll be a good litmus test for when that was graded. 419 last year, right? So that's a little early. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, all in the same batch. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 105, let's say. So of these sales of this book, 105 out of 167, about 2/3 of them almost are recent slabs. These are not books that collectors held onto and slabbed or bought from somebody else and resold. So about 2/3 of the books are books that are slabs that are brand new to market, which means there are a lot of slabs in collections that people are holding on to, whether actively or passively. I mean, those collections that are found years later, somebody just has them in, in the garage or in the attic, but a lot of books. So a lot of the, I don't know how many books were slabbed this year to 9.8, but 105 of them were sold approximately. That means that people got the book raw, graded it, and sold it, rather than people buying a graded book and selling it, which there's another implication there, because since the market's gone down, it's going to be difficult to find people who bought a book in 2021 or 2022 and are selling it for much less than they paid for it now. Maybe they're holding on to it, hoping at some point, someday, it will get some more value. Let's move on to another book that's also a perennial key that's related to Spider-Man 1, and that's Spawn 1. There's always going to be Spawn 1s. And look here, we have had a little bit of movie news, but I think a lot of consistency here as well, right? 657, 672, 805, 951, 1070 during the boom. And I'm only looking at 9/8, 728, and we're on pace for about 850. So again, a little bit more of demand during the boom. I want to look at the same thing for this book in terms of what's sold this year. So here are the 9/8 for 284. And we can just glance down. Look at all these numbers that begin with 4. They begin with 4 3s and 4 4s. Those are all pretty recent sales. There are a lot of them. More than half, definitely. And probably about the same ratio, about the 2/3 ratio of the books that were similar Spider-Man 1. So people are not holding on to this book necessarily. There are a lot of folks, and there's a demand for it. People are buying new slabs of this. They're buying 9.8s that are just slabbed by somebody else. There are, I would say, dealers more than collectors that are finding this book raw, getting it graded, selling it at a 9.8. So that aspect of the market, for certain books, not for every book, but for a book like Spawn 1, which is still going to have value in a 9.8, and if we track the values of the 9.8s over time, I mean, it jumped up to what, to like 250-ish, and now it's at about 130. There's been a slow descent since the boom, but not a precipitous drop like there have been in other books. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that this didn't really jump around due to movie news. There's been some movie news, certainly, on this book, but it hasn't driven the price crazy. So I find all of this kind of interesting. And then we're going to look at one more book, and this might be a little bit different because this does have speculation behind it. Ultimate Fallout 4, first appearance of Miles Morales. But look at this. It's still selling. Interestingly, right? Pre-boom, 521, right? 263, 282, 521, right? That jumps up a lot. That's a lot more. But then it's kind of settled in, 232, 260, 324. And we're looking at a pace of more than 300 sales this year. I'm interested also in how many this year's sales, right? The price has come down. I think people are still waiting for the news, but look, there a lot of 4s, not as many as I think Spawn, right? We're seeing a lot of earlier numbers. So people who've had this book are selling it. Again, I would say certification numbers that begin with 4.3 and 4.4 are going to be this year. I want to find one that's close. Here, 4.29. 4.29 was graded in July. So, I mean, yeah, even the 4.3s, people have held it for less than a year, right? So there are a good number of them out there. But there are a lot of other older ones being sold in the 9.8s. And that could be maybe people just kind of getting a little worried and moving on from the book or not. So these key issues, it looks like people are still buying the slabs. Now, I'd like to know what your thoughts are on this idea. Now, do you think that collectors are still buying graded comic books of these keys? I will give you, if we looked at just some random book, but you're not going to have a very large sample size that, or a book that, like Savage She-Hulk, a book that got hot during the pandemic, and has kind of cooled off. Yeah, you're going to see probably a diminishing in the number of slabs. And that probably is affecting the number of slabs sold overall. And I think you have to break it down into groups, right? High value books, Amazing Fantasy 15 and Tales of Suspense 39 in any grade. It's harder for collectors to buy that book raw, to find it raw, and to be certain that it is what it is. That's why there's CGC, right? The CGC isn't really there for your Spider-Man 1, right? There for your Amazing Spider-Man 1. If I'm buying an Amazing Fantasy 15, I might feel a little more confident buying a graded copy, especially online. I think maybe in person at shows, the raw sales are outpacing the graded sales. I can understand that. But what we're looking for is online. How are graded sales? And this, I think, the fact that these keys, and it would take, some time to look at some other lesser keys, and maybe take a look at some keys that have jumped around, a New Mutants 98 or an Uncanny or an X-Men 130, books that have had boosts because of movie news and speculation. But it seems like this indicates to me some strength in the market, that there's still a demand. There's demand at the right price, but there's still people buying these books. And for the long-term health of the comic book market, as long as people are still buying the books, they're still going to have value. The value may be less than it was in 2021 and 2022, but books are still going to have value. It's when nobody wants them anymore. And, you need that end collector. These are collectible books. These are books everybody wants. So for the high value books, yes, buying slab books makes sense. For mid-value books, a book that's $150, is it, for me, is it worth getting it graded? Or is it easier to sell raw? Is it easier to buy raw and maybe pay $40 less? Pay $130 for a raw copy as opposed to $175 for a graded copy in like a 5.0 of a minor key from a Silver Bronze Age, right? I think that's up to the collector. There's still people that like slabs. And listen, I know that some of these people watching this video, I know you're never slabbers. That's fine, right? But it's much easier to track sales of slabs than of raw books, especially for what grade they're going for. And I will say it's a lot. I'm a lot more confident as a seller online for big value books, selling a graded book, because there's an independent party. It's not me saying that it's a very fine. It's, CGC saying it's an 8.0 off-white pages, whatever it is. It is what it is. And there's, if both the buyer and seller can agree to go by what CGC said, that's fine. And I also know, and how many people have done this? I've done it occasionally. You buy a graded book and crack it out. Buy it online, right? If I'm going to buy a $300 book that I want for my personal collection, I have no intent to sell it anytime soon. Maybe I buy a graded one and crack it out. Whether or not I think I can improve it with a CPR, right? Just because I know if it's a harder to find book, I did this with a Golden Age book. I got it in a 5.5 for a few $100s. I got a good deal in a 5.5, and I knew what it was, right? I knew it wasn't restored, and I knew the grade I was getting. So there was some comfort there. Again, 9.8s, right? A Spawn one. 9.8 is what, about $1.25 now? Let's say, maybe a little bit more. What is a high grade raw for? You're not getting, it costs 20, you're not getting anywhere near $100 for a raw spawn 1, right? So as a seller, it's worth getting it graded. Let me know what your thoughts are. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'd like to thank you for stopping by. You can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.